Oops. Hello? Okay. Well, welcome to our very formal Public Protection and Judiciary Committee meeting. So we'll call to order. Roll call. Janet?
Bob Fiedler,
Present.
Paul Adams,
Present.
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 Are there any changes to our minutes from our last meeting? If there are no amendments or changes, they're approved. Public comment. Is there any public comment today? I see no public comment today. No public comment. I will move to the next item, our business items. We'll call on the County Administrator, Ken Witt, for the financial report.
Yeah, I looked through the financial report through April. Everyone's pretty much on target where they should be. You should be looking at about 70% of the budget remaining. If you flip through it, probably the only line item that really caught my attention was, since Christy's not here, Clerk of Courts, her interpreter fee, she's already consumed 75% of those budgeted amounts. So you can just see that demand for interpreter services increasing.
That was brought to us by Judge Needham to make sure we knew what the judges had put up with for the past year and a half. And unless there are questions for Ken on the budget, I don't see any. We'll go to Judge Needham for the judicial report.
Yeah, and maybe Ken's comment is a good first topic to discuss. The number, excuse me, of litigants who we're seeing or non-English speakers continues to grow exponentially. Clearly, the number one language that we have to provide translation for is Spanish. In order to get reimbursement from the state, we have to use certified court interpreters, which becomes a little challenging because of the pool. So we're very fortunate to have Monica Marin, who is a certified court interpreter, as our primary number one go-to person, but her fame is spreading, and I know she's now interpreting in Eau Claire, Polk County, Pierce County, Dunn County, and she's out of St. Paul, Minneapolis. So it's a growing concern and challenge. We're going to meet with Christy, I think, within the next month to talk maybe about some type of block scheduling where we can just schedule her for a block period of time and do all of our Spanish-speaking litigants at that time. Right now it's kind of hit and miss, and for every time she comes out here, there's a upfront charge and then the hourly charge. So that's one thing we're working on. But the languages that we're seeing, Judge Nordstrand yesterday had a Turkish speaking fellow. He had a couple of Russian speaking gentlemen. Somali is a language we see a lot of, Vietnamese, Hmong, you name it, we're seeing it. And as I said, that number is not going to shrink. It's going to continue to grow in terms of the costs associated with translation. So it's on our radar. We're trying to figure out if at least the Spanish speakers, we can find a way to consolidate and at least somewhat control the cost. So that's one thing that we have in process.
Judge, can I just interrupt for 1 second and ask either you
Certainly.
or the administrator, how are those costs borne? Who pays for them?
The county.
The county directly?
We cannot tax the costs against the individual under, I assume, federal legislation that prohibits, that recouping. So it's all borne by the county. As I said, if it is a certified interpreter, we can get some reimbursement from the state. I say some, it's not dollar for dollar, but it does help contribute. So we try as best we can to find certified court interpreters, but for some of these languages that are not as common, we don't have certified interpreters. You just find somebody who hopefully can provide the service. Some counties are using what's called language line, where you call into a service and they have an interpreter available over the phone. That's not a reimbursable expense, but it's something we're exploring. But with that comes the issues with technology, as well as just the mode and manner of translation. The Spanish-speaking interpreter that we use, she does on the fly, as I call it. So as I'm talking, she's interpreting. With many other languages, I say something, I stop, they interpret. I say something, I stop, they interpret. So it takes twice, 3 times as long to conduct a hearing. But with our Spanish interpreters, they do it on the fly, which is seamless and a real benefit to us. We'll have a new chief judge in District 10 as of August 1. Chief Judge Maureen Boyle's term expired, and so the court has named John Anderson, who is a judge in Bayfield County, as our new chief judge. He will select his deputy, and I don't know who that's going to be, but Judge Anderson takes over as chief on August 1. If you paid attention to some recent press releases, Ann Walsh Bradley, I think currently the longest serving justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, has announced her retirement. She will not run for election next April. And so there will be, I'm sure, a very hotly contested, very expensive election for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And so that really came as a surprise to many of us that Justice Bradley was retiring, but she's been on the bench, I think, longer than I have. We finished the Mew trial, and so I can't thank enough the sheriff, as well as all departments. It was disruptive. It was certainly a high-profile case with a lot of media, the victims, their families, and so it created a fair amount of disruption, but Judge Waterman conducted the trial expertly and seamlessly, and so we're thankful that it's over with, but we learned some things in terms of those types of cases and how to manage them. Judge Nordstrand just finished an 8-day trial up in Polk County, cold case, a woman who 40 years after the fact was charged with homicide. They arrested her down in Arizona, brought her back, and tried her for a cold case, and Judge Nordstrand was assigned to the case, which again is not unusual that we get assigned out to other counties when they have conflicts or recusals. So Judge Nordstrand tried that case the last 2 weeks. So again, hats off and kudos to him. It was really his first major trial, and one again that, as I understand, he tried very well and met with high praise. We've hired a law clerk for the summer, a young lady who graduated from Willamette Law School out in Oregon. I pronounced it wrong first, and Judge Nordstrand corrected me right away. And so she is working for us this summer. I think plans to take the Minnesota bar at some point, and then will continue with us, I think probably until she can find a full-time job as a lawyer. We also have a student intern, last name may sound familiar, Hunter Witt, is working for us this summer, doing a lot of observation, but we also have some projects for him. He'll graduate, as I understand, after first semester this coming year, and then plans to go to law school. And so he worked for the DA's office in Eau Claire last summer and is working for us this summer, and did a memo for me for a sentencing today, and so I'll grade it after we're done here.
No pressure.
No pressure. If you're not aware, Christy Severson celebrated 30 years with the county about a month ago, and so we certainly recognize her service to the county, both as a clerk, deputy clerk, and now as the clerk of courts for St. Croix County. The judges, and primarily Judge Waterman and a subcommittee of CJCC, continue to work with Phil's group on our testing. It's an expensive endeavor to test people who are on bail or bond, or families who we have in child protection cases. And so we're working with his staff to identify, those cases where testing will hopefully be beneficial. And we're trying to narrow that pool of people. When the Sheriff's Department ran the testing for us, it wasn't an issue. We just tested as many people as we wanted, and the sheriff accommodated. But now that we have a separate department, we are trying to be mindful of their resources. And we've also developed some step-down options for people who test consistently negative. After a period of time, we will step them down. In other words, they go from testing 3 times per week to twice a week to once a week, or eliminate testing altogether. So that's good for public protection, it's good for accountability. And so we are working with Phil and his staff on those types of options and alternatives. There were 3 laws passed by the legislature this last spring and signed into law by the governor that deal with judicial security. Unfortunately, that's a reality, again, that we face every day and is heightened in certain situations. But these 3 new laws will prohibit picketing at judges' homes. It will permit us now to claim as a non-public record security profiles that we put on file with the sheriff that identify, we provide pretty much a layout of our homes, we provide our security codes for our garages, etc. So if we have an incident, the sheriff or law enforcement can effectively respond. The Attorney General was of the opinion those were public records. And if someone made a request of the sheriff, arguably under that analysis, they would have to provide our blueprints and security codes and other things, which obviously for many of the judges around the state meant we weren't going to file them. So this new law will now permit the sheriff to maintain those records, that information, and not be subject to public inspection. And then the last bill was a bill that will permit judges to really eliminate a lot of our public access information. So for instance, we'll be able now to have Google and others take off our public information off of websites. It will also take our public information off of public records. So the state is working with the Register of Deeds and other entities that maintain our addresses, maintain our identifying information, to have that taken off of public access. Judge Nordstrand was very proactive on that legislation, went down and did a fair amount of lobbying, and we were successful in getting all 3 through and getting all 3 signed into law by the governor. So that's my report. Alderman has something to say.
Oh, thank you, Judge. Questions for the judge? Observations? I'm glad to, that was a very comprehensive report. Thank you, Judge. And good to see you again. It's been a few months since we've been together, since we've had our March meeting. I don't think we had one, and then we had the elections, and so it's good to see everybody again. If there are no questions for the judge, thank you for being with us this morning. And thank you, Judge Waterman, for being with us. And again, what an amazing effort on your part on that major trial that you conducted recently. Thank you for that. We'll turn to the medical examiner and Patty Scheiner.
Okay, so in the packet you will see the samples of CT scan interpretation, the PowerPoint on the Randox, and how now we are up and running with this technology. And in May, we had 12 cases that qualified for autopsy. For rule-out, we scanned them and did in-house drug testing. By doing so, it would have cost $38,400 to autopsy all those people. By scanning in-house and doing our own drug testing, it cost $6,420 for a savings of $31,980. And with that, not only did we get comprehensive scientific-based testing done, we also were able to be fiscally responsible, which Ken appreciates. As we move forward right now, we're just doing the qualifying. Do the decedents have, is what in their system supposed to be in their system is kind of what we're going for. So most of these folks are between 55 and 75 years old. Most of them don't qualify for an autopsy, but we don't have x-ray vision, but now we do. So with our high cremation rate, we now are signing death certificates with actual findings versus probable. And where does that come into play? A lot of that comes into play with life insurance. For instance, you found someone in the bathroom deceased, and what the family or the next of kin sees is lots of fluid. They anticipate that it's blood, but it's not. It's a natural decomposition of the body. So they assume that something bad happened. We then can bring them back to our facility and scan that there's no trauma here. There's no skull fractures, there's no rib fractures, no long bone fractures. Yes, there was purge, but that's what this is. So we can rule out trauma with the CT and then rule out any overdose or anything like that with the drug testing, which then processes cause and manner so much faster. Yes, it is a natural death, and here is the cause. And it is, as you can see on that CT scan, it shows the findings, which is very, very helpful. As we move forward, we were contacted by the Wisconsin Counties Association to do an article in the magazine on our effectiveness and efficiencies that we're doing here in St. Croix County. And we're also going to be collaborating with Polk County as they utilize our services, and then also Pierce County that has utilized our services for storage. So right now, the way we sit, we are really ahead of everybody else when it comes to the technology that we're doing. It doesn't lessen, if there's crime, we still have to do autopsies. That only makes sense. But when you look at our caseload and the amount of death investigations that we're doing is increasing. From back in 2017, we had about 13% of our scenes, our visits were scenes. Now we're at 23%. That's actually the baby boomers starting to age out and seeing it in statistics. And then this here rolls into, now you have law enforcement have scene visits. And these are natural deaths, but they're going to happen more and more. So far this year, we have signed 88 death certificates. So that just gives you an idea of how much this is coming to play.
Excuse me, Penny, could you define a scene visit for us?
A scene visit is someone who is found deceased. So they're not on hospice, they're not in a hospital, they're not in a skilled nursing facility. They could be in an assisted living facility, but that's a whole different category. But it's people that die at home, accidents, suicides, all those there. But it's the natural deaths that are increasing of the elderly population. So we're doing a lot of scene visits on old people, just to be blunt. And we all know none of us are going to win the race, so it's only going to keep increasing. And 61% of all folks through the funeral home group do not have funeral plans, which is why we have such a long stay now. Some of our decedents stay with us for 10 days. And then it's interesting in the point that people are price shopping, they're looking, what do I want, what do I need, what's the value of said services, and they're going all over. So we're being serviced by well over 100 funeral homes now. They're coming from all over. Also in the packet is the Donate Life statistics for St. Croix County. St. Croix County, we have been statistically one of the most pro donor, So we, as you can see with the slide, the information that came out with the donors that we had here in St. Croix County, and we do this here procurement right at our facility. So it has really helped streamline everything. But with every donor, 75 lives are impacted positively. So this is afterlife care that people in St. Croix County are taking very serious. And because we have the cooler and the facility, we're able to meet their needs way better than before. And the primary reason is none of our hospitals have coolers. So, you know, a person can want to donate, but they have to be refrigerated in a certain amount of time. And we can offer that, so that helps keep people's wishes up. And then we did have a problematic 10 days in May where we had 7 alcohol-related deaths between the ages of 27 and 55, 5 men and 2 women. 3 were people that had very high alcohol intoxication rates on their toxicology. The highest was 0.475. And then the other ones were actual medical conditions that were caused by alcohol. And the amount of alcohol that people are drinking at a young age is really starting to show in a lot of our statistics, and it's also showing in our hospice for the younger folks that are going into hospice because of liver and kidney disease due to chronic alcoholism. So it's clearly something that we're seeing the negative impacts, but the weird thing is because alcohol is natural, it's considered a natural death if they die with a disease of alcohol. So pancreatitis, liver disease, kidney failure can be alcohol related, but it goes under the category of natural death. So with that, that's all I have.
Well, thank you. Supervisor?
Oh, go ahead, you finish.
No, no.
I had a question about donation. So is it still primarily the driver's license donor? But I have that on mine, right? But is that enough?
Yeah, so the donation that we do, so there's 2 types of donation. There's the donation where you do organ donation and you're brain dead. And then there's the donation where you do tissue donation and you can be deceased up to 12 hours and still donate. So yes, your driver's license is the indicator and it's informed consent, but there are 2 types of donation. We only do tissue donation in our facility, and that gives people more opportunities for eyes, cartilage, valves, that type of procurement, which is way different than lungs, heart, and some of the other organs that they use for live donation. Does that make sense?
Supervisor?
Thank you, Chair. Could you speak to who or what the process is on your replacement? I'm not sure.
Yep, we're working on it. We've got a really talented pool from inside. I got to have job descriptions to HR by next Friday. I think it's going to be different, but hopefully with a combination of full-time, part-time workers, the department will be just fine.
Any other questions for the medical examiner? I just had one follow-on thought. Could you comment just a little bit more about the alcohol issues that you see, and also the number of drug, particularly fentanyl deaths that we're seeing?
So we haven't really seen in our office fentanyl death in quite a few months, and want to knock wood on that, and that's a good thing. There's a lot of reasons for that. Narcan and Narcan distribution is a huge part of that. And historically, we have had decedents come through our office that have been Narcaned 10, 12, 20 times. So, you know, Narcan really has changed what addiction looks like, and most addicts, they usually do it together, so there's someone with Narcan. So I think Narcan deaths actually skew a lot. We have them, but not as often as one would think, because there's a lot of options. And if you overdose and are transported to the cities, we never hear about it. So there's a lot of data that we're not seeing. So for my office, we have not had a fentanyl overdose in quite a few months. We've had meth overdoses, but not fentanyl.
And although this isn't necessarily an issue for the medical examiner or for the county necessarily, you mentioned that 61% or so of the folks that are passing away do not have funeral plans. Would you have any recommendations on that maybe are within the realm of the county or simply of public interest that we could share with people?
I'm working with a lot of different local libraries and stuff and just doing education and outreach and church. And I mean, it's, the baby boomer generation came out of the generation that believed the greatest generation. I went through the Depression and all that, and the county took care of it. So they were raised thinking the county is going to take care of funerals. And then the baby boomer generation, because they were raised that way, literally, you'll go to the scene and the county will take care of it. And it's like, no, you have your trust and all that there set up, but no one has their actual funeral set up. So then that causes angst a lot of times within the family, because now they're the ones that have to come up with the money. And a lot of them, for a lot of different reasons, don't have that. So, and the family has never talked about, I want to be cremated, I don't want to be cremated. I want this, I don't want that. So families then just put it off. And we're seeing it not only in our office, but with the funeral homes. We're all fighting the same thing, trying to get people informed to plan your own funeral. It's not that hard. It really isn't. And you can just write it down and tell someone that you know or love, here's my thing. This is what I want. Go to the funeral home, set it up. It's not that hard, but by doing so, it's like admitting we're not going to win the race. It's like, that's really what it is. It's like, I'm going to die. And there's a lot of people that just can't accept the fact that there is an end in this whole crazy situation that we're living. And taking care of funeral planning is so important to everybody else, because funeral planning is telling your story on the way you want it told. If you don't plan it, someone else is going to tell your story, and no one's going to know if it's true. And I always say, nobody realizes that, my grandkids, I'm just the white-haired grandma. They don't realize I was raised in the 60s and 70s. I had fun. And a lot of us here, we had fun. We need to tell our own story and be empowered to tell our own story so that our generations can carry on to why we are the way we are. And I think that is something that most people don't want to do. They look at funerals as really sad, and really it's legacy building. And that's the change of communication we all should be doing.
Thank you, Patty. If there are no other questions, we'll hear our next story from Sean Kinsella, the Executive Director of the CASA program. Sean, and I might add that Sean is basically going to be with us every quarter to give us updates on CASA, both as we discussed here at this committee, and also as one of our colleagues formally requested at a board meeting last fall. So Sean, tell us what's happening with CASA.
Great, thank you very much. If you can move to the next slide. With consultation from Mr. Witt, we decided to take the money that was given to us and move it into deferred revenue. This allows us to better track that, and so it actually shows up as a liability, not as a profit center. We then take a set amount of money out each month, which will allow that to zero out come the end of 2026. So it was very good advice. Basically, $8,333 comes out each month, and that's how we're utilizing that money so that we can show definitively that that money was used up for reporting purposes. Next slide. So our financial position, we have a strong financial position. Also, we just had our Stand Up for Kids event a couple weeks ago, and I'm very happy to say that we sold 100% of our seats. The year before, I nearly had to be hospitalized because I think 2 weeks before we had sold 12. And I was like, it's my 11th birthday all over again. No one's going to come. So really great attendance, and I just think we'll continue to build on that. So our financial position right now is that we have $335,000 in our bank accounts. So $250 is in our checking, and that we have now been able to establish a reserve. So a good nonprofit, community-based nonprofit, should have 6 months operation cash in its reserves in the event that something happens, and we've now hit that. We actually have planned for the end of the year. We're trying to add another position, so we are set for our growth, and then I think we'll be stabilized for quite a while. Any questions on that? All right, let's go to our actual versus budget. So right now, we have, these are our performance metrics, and I think if we can scroll down just a little bit more, I want to take you down to total revenue. We were budgeted for $95,000 at this point in the year, and we have raised $118,000. So we are above performance. On the left, which is our actual versus budgeted, that was just some factors that played out. Our grant cycle doesn't really start until April, so the first 3 months we have no revenue of the year. So we've started our grant cycle, and if we move on, I will tell you about our resource development plan. So we are required, partly as being a nonprofit, but also being under the CASA umbrella from national organization, to have a resource development plan. This year we've identified 14 grants that should total $318,000. That's if we get 100% of them. Right now, our experience rate is closer to 33%. But right now, we've applied for year-to-date 3 grants totaling $175,000. We've been notified of 2 of them. One we received none on, and the other we received $5,000. So right now, we're hitting about 25% of our possible rewards, which is a little low, but we don't have that many grants out yet. Our performance, our advocate recruitment is actually ahead. We're probably going to pause over the summer because actual child cases are down right now. And we actually have 8 volunteers in training. We are meeting over in New Richmond right now. So currently we have 21 special advocates with another 8 coming in, and we are currently serving 26 children. We have a few more that are in the waiting here. So that's our performance. And I really want to talk to you about kind of our new service. So one of the things that we did do is we applied for the VOCA grant. That stands for the Victims of Crime Act. This will allow us to apply for funding for anyone who is the victim of a violent crime. And so in our realm, that would be children, mostly girls who've been raped. They would be eligible for $200 in technology, $300 in clothing, and then $5,000 for mental health. So one of the things that we're seeing right now in mental health is a lot of the community-based providers are moving away from insurance. Insurance takes a long time to pay out. If you're a provider, it can take up to 3 months to get your reimbursement. And it's not paying at the going rate. So a lot of our kids can't actually get the need that they desperately need, the help that they desperately need. What we're seeing is long waiting lines, fewer providers taking Badger Care, and then if your parents do have insurance, there's always the issue of the out-of-pocket expense. So we know that out-of-pocket expense is growing. Maybe you've seen that with your own insurance policies. $2,000 would be considered low right now. They're going as high as $8,000 and $10,000, with the average American family having about $400 in their savings and a therapy session running between $120 to $220. You quickly move through that money and you can't get the help that you need. So this 5,000 would allow us to now actually private pay for that mental health. Also, because the really good trauma therapists are in such high demand, they don't really need to take insurance and deal with that mess. So we would now gain access to those highly qualified individuals that we need that can do that trauma therapy. Right now, I think it's 6 weeks to 3 months right now just to get the evaluations done, and then you move from the evaluator to now the therapist, and you re-enter a waiting period. So we are very hopeful on this. We have been waiting for this. This has been in our business plan. It's a 3-year grant, so you have to first show, performance so that you've actually demonstrated something, and then you've got to wait for those 3 years to come. So this will be our first time to apply for it. We're nervous about it. This is the grant that was heavily defunded by the current administration. So it was paying out around, some of the providers were getting $700,000. They've now capped it at $250,000. So greatly reduced, and we'll see if they'll even accept us because we are new to the whole VOCA system. So that is kind of how we've been putting those monies to use. Our intention is to expand here with one more full-time hire the fourth quarter of the year. This grant will determine that. This grant also has a lot of strings attached, like federal grants do. There's a lot of administrative overhead to assure that you're meeting your goals with monthly reporting. So it's also not an easy grant, but we believe that it's necessary to help stabilize this organization and move it forward. That's it in a nutshell. I kind of went through that quite fast. Any questions that people would have?
Well, thank you, Sean. That was an excellent update. Questions for Sean?
No, I just had a comment.
Okay, comment.
I think this is great, and I think this is what the full board would appreciate seeing too.
Yeah. I want to just say one more thing on the VOCA grant. So it'd be available for anybody. So also the parents of any of the children we work for. If there was a violent act, usually, like we said, in our world, that's mostly domestic violence and rape. We would be able to also help the parents with that. There's actually $40,000 that's available, but under our rubric of what we provide, we can get that $5,500 for the kids. So there are 2 other organizations that have this grant, just so you know, and that is Turning Point and SART. So the sexual assault resource, and then our Turning Point shelter has the ability to go after this as well. So,
Sean, I did have just a couple questions. Just a couple short-term and one long-term. Our goal is to see you very successful and self-funded, and I wasn't sure exactly what year we had hoped for that self-funding would kick in. Was it 2026?
2026 is when the ARPA money expires and has to be reported out. I'm always hopeful for every year that I reach that. So we do have a grant writer, so part of the money that we receive from you, we used for a contracted grant writer to help us go after the bigger grants, these more complicated grants that, like this federal one. So we're hoping that will, if we get that, that will be about 50% of our budget. So we're very hopeful on it.
Supervisor Ramberg.
Thank you, Chair. You talked about SART and Turning Point being able to apply for these grants as well. Is there a partnership that CASA has with them to share, if they get one and we don't, to share the funding, or to delegate somebody over, one of ours over to participate?
So yes and no. We provide different services, so our services don't really overlap. SART and Turning Point really deal more with adults. So in Turning Point, the kids will often come to the shelter, but they're not really providing services to the kids at the shelter. Whereas our service is really directed towards kids, and we do less with the adults. Matter of fact, we're really supposed to focus purely on the kids. However, this grant does require that, that we cooperate with the other organizations. Right now, we sit on the same committees with Turning Point. I've never met anybody from SART other than in court, and I'm not really sure what their global goal is. But yes, we do some, there's some overlap, but it's very small is what I would say. Good question on that.
Seeing no other questions, thank you again, Sean, and we'll look forward to seeing you next quarter. And with another great report. Thanks. I will now turn to Sheriff Knudsen. Phil, I'm sorry. Phil Galley, head of our Justice Services Department.
That's better, I think. Okay. So if you see these two charts here, the top one comes from the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which is compiled by the U.S. Department of Justice every year. The bottom one is from the Uniform Crime Report, which is compiled by the FBI every year. Both look at years 2020, 2021, 2022. I think just a couple quick notes. There's a lot of different repositories we can go to get crime data. These are both publicly available, but it's just a snapshot. This is not comprehensive. You'll notice a couple of the areas that are highlighted in yellow are actually missing information, missing data, which unfortunately it happens. If you scroll down a little bit further, where it's highlighted in green, those numbers were not applicable. Right, yeah, you can barely see it right there. So domestic violence, fraud, and elder abuse. I think for me, if we look at 2020 and then 2021, 2022, there's considerable drop off in a lot of those categories from 21 to 22, 20 to 21 to 22. And that tracks with crime trends in the United States coming out of the pandemic. There were upticks in social disorder and other types of crime throughout the U.S. starting in March of 20 and really throughout the rest of 2020. And I think that's reflected here. Again, I think we can go a lot of different directions with this. For me, this is just informative, right? It just helps to paint a small picture of a 3-year snapshot of some crime trends in St. Croix County. It also speaks to differences, right? So the top chart reflects incidents and reported criminal behavior, whereas the bottom one looks at arrests. Those are two different things. So again, when we talk about crime, there are differences between crime that's reported, a report taken, an arrest, a prosecution, a conviction. So all of those things mean widely different things. And so I really think if we want to move forward and we want to look at projects like this, I think that's fine. But it is complicated. And I think one of the big things with crime numbers is you really, really have to be very specific in how you define what we're looking for. Because otherwise it could be misleading, right? So those are my big takeaways from this. Again, it's very much just a snapshot of 3 years, certain crime categories. I mean, we could get in and flesh each of these out even further and break them down to even more of a granular level. But I'll take any questions or if anybody has thoughts.
Well, thank you, Phil, for this effort. I know we'd been very interested in hearing additional information on some of the trends that were going on, and this is a good start. Question for us, though. From this data, or anything you've got that you could think about from 2023 that you might just not have, might have at your fingertips, but haven't reflected in the charts, can you share with us what you think some of this data means in terms of trends that we're seeing? And I would just say that obviously several of your colleagues that are here could chip in too if they'd like, the sheriff or the chief judge. But what does it mean for us, particularly as a county board? Does this suggest anything that we need to be considering?
It's hard. I mean, 2023 data is not available right now, at least, publicly available in mass quantities. I think, though, there's differences between policy and legislation. So some of these results here may be due to legislation in the state and across the country, right? Changes due to laws. Some of it may be due to policy, arrest policies, department policies, how things are handled. If you were to go back from 2017 to 2021 and look at bail jumping charges here in St. Croix County, they would be, considerably higher than they are now. So that's just one thing to look at. And that's because we've, as a county, changed the policy with how we deal with bail jumping. And that, Judge Needham spoke about that a little bit earlier with drug testing and pretrial. It's still a tool that we use. The judges have the discretion to use that as they see fit. And pretrial, we administer that. But for the most part, bail jumping is not being charged. So we have dramatically fewer bail jumping charges in St. Croix County in 2023 or 2024 even than we did 6 or 7 years ago. But to really say more beyond that, I would ask anyone else if the sheriff has thoughts or if Judge Needham has thoughts, because Chair Fiedler, you raise another really good point. We would need to look at, I think, court data, probation data, and other types of municipal court data to see what's going on, to really get a full comprehensive picture. So I'm not trying to kind of pass on your question. It's just, it is very complicated. I think the idea might be to look at 1 or 2 areas, and then we can really look at the trends there. And I personally probably feel the most comfortable speaking about treatment court and pretrial, with those departments being under our umbrella.
I think what I'll suggest we do is not delve any deeper into that today, just because we also have a full agenda, and it's very much a worthwhile topic for a future meeting, and we can discuss it further and pinpoint a couple of things and hone in on something if that's where we end up going on that. So are there any other questions for Phil Valley? Seeing none, thank you, Phil, and appreciate the updates. They're great. The next item we've got is consideration of the capital improvements projects and our county administrator.
All right, I'm going to go through the entire capital improvement plan for the projects that are pertinent to this committee fairly briefly, because we have the next agenda item is a deeper delve into the big 800-pound gorilla of the plan, the jail expansion. I'm not referring directly to Brent. It's just a phrase that we use. So to read the graph that we have in front of you, so I highlighted the rows that are pertinent to this committee. So those are the ones we're going to focus on. Here is the highlighted rows. If you see the project column, the third column in, the number there, that's just the project number that we assign to it. If it's in red, that means it's a new project. So red means new. And then if you ever see a dollar amount that's red, that means that number is brand new to the KIP, and it's changed from what we had previously projected. So when we get to the jail expansion, that number is going to be in red, because last time we had projected 30 million, now we're up to 57 million, something like that. Brent will explain that number. So again, that's the layout of what we're looking at. When we look at the 5-year capital projects, we ask for projects to enter in the last year of the project. That's not always the case. Sometimes things come up and say, we probably need a roof sooner than 5 years because we've identified it's leaking. Something like that will come up. So they'll come in sooner. But generally, I ask for them to start at the end so we can plan for them well in advance. They'll work their way through the KIP. And then ultimately, you're really, at the end of the day, only approving, when it's all said and done, fiscal year 2025 projects. Anything that's in 26 through 2029, we are not authorized to spend money on yet. It's only going to be the 2025 projects that we're actually going to start spending money on those projects. So the projects that are highlighted is a grand courtroom. So we're planning, way out at the end, 2029, to take one of the upstairs courtrooms that's going to be vacant for a number of years and make it into a larger courtroom. So like the Mew trial that happened, we would have a larger courtroom with larger capacity. So that's kind of the reason that we're looking at doing that. And so we would just flip the judge up to that courtroom in those circumstances when it's needed. So really looking over the next 10 to 20 years before we have 8 judges, that's a better use of that space. The next item on there is a UPS for our CT scanner. I guess power fluctuations are not good for CT machines. So we learned that, so we need to invest some additional money in order to help protect the equipment that we have with the medical examiner. Out in 2029 then, the next item on there, Project 10153, for our DD building is an autopsy suite. And so that's part of Patty's grand plan of how the county is going to continue to develop in the forensic sciences. And so as that project gets closer, we'll delve more into that, but we wanted to get it on the plan, long-range planning, so we can start talking about that. Yes, Supervisor Rainberg.
What is the DD building again?
Yep, so the DD building is in New Richmond. It's the building that sits directly behind the healthcare campus. So it was built in 1973, I think it was. And it was developmentally disabled. That's why it was labeled as DD. Now we have our drug task force and the medical examiner, so now it's death and drugs. But it's still DD building. It just made sense, so we left the name. We have on here a recurring item of $15,000 for a copy machine. It alternates every 5 years between the clerk of courts and the district attorney's office. It's just a recurring expense that we have. When we get down into the sheriff's department, law enforcement, we have our recurring squad vehicles. You can see the escalating price on there. Part of it is inflation of vehicles. That price has gone up. Also the addition of additional deputies, though. We've added quite a few deputies over the last year or two, and so that cost is going to go up. Also, we rotate those vehicles every 3 years. We put on a new item, Sheriff Night Vision. So that's $147,000 out in 2029. So that would be 14 sets of night vision. We have forensic server replacement. That's really kind of a routine item. We replace that every 5 years. We also have $100,000 on there out in 2029 for a virtual reality training simulator. So VR training equipment. So these are technologies that are continuing to develop, and I think the sheriff has identified, they've advanced far enough that this is something we really want to take a look at. We've put them out there a few years yet because we think they're going to continue to evolve. We really want to see, what the evolution of it is before we invest a whole bunch of money into it. But we know, though, they are advancing to the state where we're going to want to invest in some of them. When we get to the jail, we have jail appliances. So those are kind of recurring on there. They wear out over time and we end up replacing them. The jail expansion then, I'll skip. I'll let Brent take care of that explanation. Jail dishwasher, again, just an appliance that we need to replace on a periodic basis. When we get to emergency communications, a lot of this is fairly routine. There's a lot of technology hardware that's involved with our emergency dispatch. So there's an audio log recorder. I think we've replaced that before. We'll be replacing it again out in 2028. Network switches, microwaves, along with related to all of the radio communication equipment spread out across the county. Portable radio cache, again, more hardware. DC battery replacements for the communication tower sites. We added this last year, but just starting a process of replacing all of those backup batteries because batteries wear out over time. We added last year the Hammond Tower replacement. So looking at that tower, it's in the 30 to 35 year old range. We have a lease on it right now. We used to own that, being at the old highway shop. We're leasing it right now. So we're going to evaluate, before we get to 2027, the stability of that structure and the availability of extending that lease. So this project could go away, but if it doesn't, we're going to need the resources to put a tower in the Hammond area so we can continue our communication coverage. So that one's kind of a placeholder. We're actually hopeful that we'll be able to extend the lease and that the structure is still good enough to last us another 10 or 20 years. We have radio console replacement, upgrades in 2025, 2028, 911 system replacement hardware. Again, it's just infrastructure within the 911 center. And then we added a new 2.7 million radio base station, antenna, coax replacements. So we had spent a lot of money. We spent tens of millions of dollars building all these towers and all that infrastructure throughout the county about a decade ago. And looking out about 5 years now, we're going to end up starting to have to replace some of that hardware to infrastructure because really, when you talk about the 911 communication center, it's about reliability. So you don't want to be dropping calls. You don't want to have dead zones. So it's maintaining that equipment at a very high standard, and the replacement of that is going to be starting up then in a few years. And then UPS replacement for our Hudson Baldwin centers. All right, those are the projects. So when you get down, just the summary at the end here. So what we're looking at first is the row that I highlighted there. Those are the, well, the KIP totals, I guess the row above it. This row. So these are the totals each year of the project. So we're looking at 2025 of 13 million, 3 million in 26, 66 million in 27, 4.5 million in 28, and 9 million in 2029. So we really need to stay at about 3 million if I'm going to have enough cash to cover this. My projection usually is about $3 million. So whenever we're over $3 million, we're going to be coming back to the county board for borrowing. So some of these are projects that are not this committee's jurisdiction. We'll be talking about it at other standing committees, and we'll be talking about it in July at the committee of the whole. But we will be looking at some bond issues over the next few years for the size of some of the projects coming up. And mainly the big one in 2027, Brent is going to take right now, talking about the jail expansion project. I guess my only segue into the jail project is we talked about statistics, and there's one statistic really out of the whole presentation that Brent's going to make, and that's the peak bed that we hit. I think it was a couple years ago that we hit that peak bed, and then with COVID it came back down. But the jail has so much capacity. There's so many beds that are in there. And as you look at the number of beds that are filled, we came pretty close to what our carrying capacity is in the jail, and they limited that at 80%. So that's the number one statistic that I look at. I think we hit 143, 141 or 143 out of the 180, and you're supposed to be at 80%. So really what that tells me is it's really only a matter of time before we have to do a jail expansion. So just like the government center, where the population of the county is growing, the volume in the courts is growing, it became really a matter of time and timing to do that. We're going to be looking at the same thing for the jail. So you can not do the jail in a couple years, but you will be doing a jail project probably in the next 5 to 10 minimum. We will be over capacity. You're going to start shipping inmates out of county. You're going to spend more time, more labor hours doing that than you're going to be comfortable with, and the county is going to build a jail expansion. So it's really about working to make sure we get a good plan, a good bond rate, and we do it the right way at the right time.
Ken, I think we have a couple of questions.
All right.
Supervisor Rambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ken, from your perspective, now that we've been doing the KIP for several years, one of the issues I've always felt with capital improvement, as soon as you buy something, Mother Nature's working real hard to take it back. And the life expectancy of assets, a lot of times, especially us as homeowners, like sealing your deck, you're supposed to do that so often. And if we don't, then I'm gonna fall through and break a leg. as far as the consequences of not doing it are severe in certain cases. And that, when I look at a plan like this, that's what I'm thinking of. And we haven't been doing that long, and it's a great program in my mind. Do you have a feel for the life expectancy of all our assets and what we've been funding? If an asset is to last 10 years, are we funding it to 20? Or are we working to get it to 10? Do you have a feel for that kind of an age of our assets?
Yeah, I mean, not specifically. I mean, I haven't laid out every asset we have and made that calculation. I mean, it would be just a mathematical calculation. You could look at every asset, the replacement cost divided by useful life, and you'd have a set dollar amount every year. I don't have that. I think we do it probably closer to the way the highway department does it, where, you know, idealistically, you'd be probably laying a lot more lanes of highway, replacing them every year than the useful life tells you. But we have tools and techniques where we can stretch things. And so that's what we're doing here also. We're looking at ways that we can stretch things out. So a roof, we identify, well, that roof needs to be replaced. Well, can we maybe get a couple extra years out of that rather than replacing it right now? So I think we use those different tools and techniques. But to answer your question specifically, no, we haven't made that mathematical calculation.
Any other questions, observations? Ken, just one last question. Could you review the process that we're going to go through on the KIP one more time in terms of, you alluded to it, but go through when we have our major milestones coming up over the next few months?
Yep. So the month of June, while all the department heads have weighed in, they've submitted their KIP requests, we came up with a plan that we're presenting to you. We're going to review it at the month of June at all 5 of the standing committees, so each committee gets a chance to talk about their projects specifically, you know, talk to the experts if you have any additional questions on it. Then in July, we'll go to the committee of the whole. We'll review it. That's our paddle meeting where we have the paddles and you get to vote the projects up or down. From there, that committee of the whole makes a recommendation. It becomes a resolution that the administration committee will take up, recommend to the county board for a September approval. And in September, when the county board approves a resolution for the capital project, that becomes a supporting piece of the 2025 budget. And really final adoption in November then. So you'll get multiple chances to see this really at your June committee meetings, July committee of the whole, and September county board, and really ultimately November county board.
Thank you. Just a quick question about the July committee of the whole. I know everybody here has been through the exercise with the paddles, and I think it's generally been well received. I think there have been some constructive comments made in the past about how that could be perhaps enhanced a bit, and I can't remember all the recommendations that have been made, but I think some of them related to focusing on the major items as opposed to some of the very minor items that are many years out. And so I don't know if that issue is of concern to the other members of the committee or not, but I know you've heard those comments before, and I'm sure whatever we do will reflect your best judgment on that.
I will take into consideration those very wise recommendations.
All righty. Is there anything else for the administrator now before we get to the big item on the agenda, maybe our future master plan? If not, I will call on the chief deputy.
Good morning. Well, the addition of a jail pod was always part of the long-term master plan when the jail was originally built back in 1993. And I believe that they anticipated at the time that somewhere around the 25-year mark is when that pod was going to be necessary. So luckily, we've made it a few more years past that. But let me try to get to my report. Did it get erased off the tray? So at any rate, back when the planning started for this campus's expansion, the addition of a jail pod was, I believe, considered part of phase 4 of this project. So we wanted to have an idea on what kind of costs are we looking at. So back when the planning started for this, we had the Samuels group put together it's just not coming together here. Put together an estimate, and that was just basically for a pod only. And they estimated that cost was going to be around $30 million. So that's what we put in the KIP last year. And realizing we had such a large ask, we wanted to make sure that we had a building that was going to work for us, work for the inmates, work for the staff. So we actually commissioned an inmate study a few months ago to look at our jail population and really tailor this master plan to what we're seeing for the trends, especially going forward. As you could see here in the average inmate daily population, that during the COVID years, through policy, really, we dropped down to only 66 inmates per day on the average. But over those next few months, we've generally been increasing. Last month, we were around 120 inmates per day. And as Ken had touched on, as far as the peaking number, so that's the averages, some high, some low days, but really we have to plan for what the peak numbers are. And what we had been seeing is that the peak numbers are generally around 20% higher than what the average daily population is. So that shows us what the maximum amount of number of cells we should be planning for. So in this chart here, kind of shows what the projections are through the year 2045. And right now, averaging around 120 inmates per day. We've already have been seeing that we're starting to trend a little bit higher than what the predictions are. So what this trend line shows is that depending on how many days an inmate is staying in the jail, and right now it's like 4.5 days per inmate. If that trends a little bit higher, that's going to affect the average daily population. So I think as we go forward, we're going to see more serious crimes, and we will be seeing inmates stay a little bit longer on the average because they're not going to qualify for bond. They're not going to be able to bond out because of the seriousness of their crime. So by the year 2045, we'll be looking at peaking numbers actually in the facility of around 200 inmates. So right now, Ken had mentioned back prior to COVID, we hit a high of 153 inmates, was our highest total ever. So one of the things that the inmate study had come back with is that 76% of our inmates only stay for 4 days, a maximum of 4 days. So they suggested that we put an intake center with more than 3 receiving cells. We have 3 receiving cells right now that handle all of these inmates. Well, you can see if you book 7.5 inmates in per day with 3 receiving cells, well, they don't all fit in there. So they all have to be transferred down to the main pod, which creates a lot of work for the jail staff of having to move people in and out of the main cell blocks, only to stay for 12, 24, 48 hours, and then they're transferred back up and then released. So the suggestion is that we build at least 28 receiving cells to handle those inmates, so they can just, and a lot of those inmates in some jails don't even get changed over into the jail clothing. They stay, wait for their bond conditions to be met, and then they're out the door. So it's...
So Brent, so if I understand that correctly then, so with the additional intake cells, you can bring someone in, if they're only going to be there for, a day or a couple days, instead of moving them into the general population, you can keep them there, which creates some efficiencies for the jail, some safety for the jail.
Absolutely. Plus, introducing somebody who's committed a low-level crime or a first-time crime to be moved down in the general population with a large smattering of other inmates and crime types isn't a good idea either. So, so this chart here kind of shows that really well of all of these inmates are staying for less than 4 days. So that would relieve the pressure down in the pods a lot. Whereas you see in this chart here, 25% of the inmates are spending a large majority of the most time down in the blocks. Which feeds into another issue that we have with separations and jail classification types. So in an ideal world, all of these different types of inmates and their classification statuses would be separated from each other. Now, because of the construction of our facility down at the pod, we have blocks with 24, 24, 20, and 16 inmates. So a lot of these classification types we can't separate. We do our best to separate them if we can. And then the dormitory style that we have with the Huber cells, those inmates, because it's a dormitory, you have free range to move throughout the day. Those inmates really can't be commingled because of classification, because at night, what they consider during the nighttime is when the inmates really need to be separated. So down at the pod where the doors can close on their individual cells, then we can keep them separated. So to go back to Ken's point with as far as housing inmates out of county, by the time we reach around 150 inmates in the building is at the point when we're going to have to start housing outside of county. Right now, the average cost per inmate per day is about $75 per inmate. So I put in the report, for every 10 inmates, it's around $22,000 per month to house them out of county. So right now, this year, we've hit 140 inmates a few times this year. With some moving around in the jail, I think we could probably get that up to around 155 inmates before we really need to consider housing inmates out of county. So we're really not that far away from looking at housing inmates somewhere else. I would say in the next 5+ years, we'll have to start looking at housing inmates elsewhere. So I don't know if this is a good time for me to take a little bit of a break and ask for anybody that might have some questions.
Questions? Oh, Judge Needham.
Not so much a question as a comment. So Brent, the study where 75% are 4 days or less, through what time period was that? Was that through 22, 23? In other words, the study covered what period of time?
Through the end of 2023, so 2015 to 2023.
And the only reason I mention that, I think everyone's mindful that in 2023 we passed the constitutional amendment that changed considerations that judges can make in setting bail. Prior to that, constitutionally, we were only to look at likelihood to return to court. That was the sole factor. As of the constitutional changes in 2023, we now can look at seriousness of the crime, prior criminal history, factors that arguably are going to potentially mean higher bail and more people being incarcerated on bail. So I just caution that these numbers may increase in terms of the average number of days people are spending in jail based on those constitutional changes. So that's
And that's a good point, because the analyst specifically came back and said, I'm having a tough time estimating what your average daily population is going to be, because I've seen a shift from in the average length of stay in your inmates. So that's why there's a range that's been provided in this chart. He's not exactly certain. Some of it is policy, some of it is legislation driven on where we're going to see our daily population. But with our proximity to the Twin Cities, I think you're going to see higher violent crimes and longer stays.
Supervisor Carlson.
Surrounding counties, how are they doing as far as their jail cells and capacity? Are they also also looking at increasing theirs? If we increase the size of ours, would they be interested in using our spaces?
Yeah, I think there's always a demand for jail cells. It kind of ebbs and flows with time. There's been a few jail expansions in our region, but there are always counties that are looking to house inmates outside of their jurisdiction. Whether we would actually want to accept some of them, we had actually a request from Milwaukee County not that long ago. We didn't accept that offer.
Yeah.
So
what I can tell you about housing out of county, I've had experience with it in other counties, and the county gets very frustrated with it pretty quickly. So, you may have, Dunn County or something that's over their capacity. They start bringing prisoners over. They're going to get tired of that really fast, and they're going to do an expansion. So I wouldn't look at a revenue source long-term at all about bringing others in.
Yeah, the reason why I brought it up was when I worked for Ramsey County, we built a new jail for the juveniles, and about a third of our beds we got from Hennepin County. But they're so close, it wasn't too hard.
Yeah, and juvenile beds would probably be a different situation. And then you're not allowed to go across state lines at all.
We hated working in it. We hated it because they would send the most troublemaker ones because,
some counties are good about sending good inmates, and some counties don't care. So it is a really difficult population to deal with because they're coming from another facility. They had different rules there. They had different canteen options. So some of the inmates were happy coming here. We housed inmates from out of county when this jail was first opened back in 93, 95, and we double bunked. So you could supplement some of the costs with housing other inmates, but like Ken said, it's a tough sell.
Sure, that's it.
Taking on other inmates also brings with it the liabilities and responsibilities and the cost of medical and mental health. They now become our responsibility, and the liability if something should happen here falls to the taxpayers of the county. We look at our medical and mental health watches. We built those 9 cells for kind of a special needs. They're full. They've been full since we first opened that wing. So to take on another county's financial responsibility, that may be for somebody else to decide after me, but boy, that's tough to do to our county.
Supervisor Ramberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to tip it upside down, if we were to do nothing and we run into this wall where we have to send prisoners out, I'm hearing 3 costs. Number one, the liability of that's going to go on to the other one, but the hassle factor has a cost that you were talking about. And I lost the dollar amount per day.
What? Around
75?
It's around $75 per inmate per day.
Okay, so when we hit that wall, it's going to be, this is what the cost is going to be if we don't do anything. And this is what the cost, I like doing the comparison. This is what the cost is going to be to do this, to build it, depending on the degree, what level we're gonna do it, and those phases. And then this is the cost it's gonna cost regardless. If we, or this is the cost, it'll be the $75 plus the hassle factor if we do nothing. So it's gonna cost this or this,
Yeah.
is what we'll be comparing, correct?
And the costs come from different pools too. So if you build a jail, that's a capital project, and debt service, I'm not restricted on a levy limit for debt service. When I have to pay another county for jail and I have to pay deputies to transport them back and forth, that's an operational cost, and that's where my levy limits are. So the pool that I have the fewest resources starts getting pulled harder.
So as
Good.
you bring up.
Just one quick second. Supervisor Leaf has a
Yeah,
question.
I was saying, just with our annual jail inspections, I mean, we've seen this, you're using the intake cells for things that aren't intended just for intake, right? And you've also, it is like Tetris watching you try to figure out how you're going to put people in the pods correctly because this person can't be with this person. So I think the smaller pod model really does make sense. And I'm assuming that the cost increases, they're probably, I mean, there are real specific requirements for all of these spaces. This is a specialized building, and I'm assuming that we're adding more safety for you all too in this process as well. So, I mean, I can see how it's inflated.
Yeah, and one of the things, and Brent is probably going to talk about it, one of the things that I asked for when they did this was look at the design from an operational cost standpoint. Don't come back to me and tell me you need twice as many now corrections deputies to man it. Design it so that we can do it with the least amount of staff as possible. And they took that into consideration, and that's in this report.
Yeah, and that's some of the talks that we had with the architects were the additions that have been made to the jail over the past 30 years have really created a lot of disjointment in some of the workload that they have to do. So you have to go through some corridors that it's not real easy to access. So I wanted to consolidate and make the jail more efficient like it had been when it was first designed. That'll be a long work in progress just to even revisit that. But as long as Ken kind of brought up some of the costs and Supervisor Ramberg brought up some of the costs, kind of the big question, I think, eventually for the county board to make is, do we build the pod or don't we build the pod right now? Do we wait? Because if we build the 28 receiving cells, and I hadn't got a chance to talk about the 25 cells for a special housing unit like the 9 that we had just built, it would handle that type of population set. The pressure that would take off of the general housing situation for the jail reduces the need for a lot of expansion for a few years, but around that 2035 mark, 2030 to 2035, is when we anticipate there will be the demonstrated need for that additional pod space. So do we build it now, or do we wait until we actually have the need? So you can see it's kind of hard to see in this estimate that we got from the architects, but if we build the pod now, it's around $10 million. If we wait until when it's supposed to be phased in around 2050, which that's a long ways away, but there's $11 million of inflationary costs. So you're just doubling the cost of the pod by waiting until we have the need. So, but with how we're going to construct the pod with smaller housing units of 4, 6, 8 housing units, we would use that immediately because we have the need to separate the inmates for safety. And right now, it's really difficult to manage. The other thing that I did look at, and I had Captain Anderson do a staffing study to see how many deputies are we going to need when this new place is built. So right now we have around 30 staff that work the floor. If we build the new jail with the intake housing, the special housing unit, and the pod, we estimate that we would need around 35 full-time equivalents. So 5 more than what we have now. Next year, with the referendum, we're getting 2 more jailers, so we will have 32. So we're actually only 3 away from being able to staff the expanded jail. So I was happy and surprised to see those numbers. And a lot of that hopefully will be due to the efficiencies that we build in and taking some of the workload off of the staff, because they run all day long.
Again, just to follow up on the earlier question I had about timing for the overall KIP, what's the timing for the overall projects that we've just been briefed on?
Yeah, so this project is on the 2027 year of the KIP. So this would probably be a 3-year build. So in 2027, November of 26, when you authorize this, we're gonna, start lining up the architect to start the design and stuff. So really 2027 is going to be design, shovel in the ground, either late into 27 or spring of 2028, and then 2 years of construction on that before everything is open and everyone's in their regular spot.
So we would bond for this?
Absolutely.
Well, I know, but I'm not saying we're not going to referendum for it. And that's just my question, like, how are we going to fund it?
Sure, yeah, so the county's not required to go to referendum for bond issue. School districts are, counties, cities, and villages are not required to. So they're different rules. So no, there's no referendum requirement for the county.
When do you think you would be making the ask for the bond from the full board?
Yeah. So the 2025 KIP is at $13 million, and the big one on there is a highway project, not your guys' project, but that's going to require a bond issue also. So we're going to ask for a $10 million bond issue in 2025, and we're going to ask for that at the December county board meeting. And so November, you're going to approve the budget, and given that all of those projects stay in there for 2025, I can't afford to do them unless you bond issue. So I'll come back the next month and ask for the bond issue authorization. So the bond issue authorization requires a 3/4 vote of the full county board. So you have to have 15 yes votes in order for that to move forward. So given that, in January, Robbie can then start that highway building project.
So you'd be asking in January of 2025 for...
This June, yeah.
Yeah, no, so December of 2024, I'm going to ask for a bond issue for 2025 projects. So once the bond authorization resolution is approved, we can start. Because from there, the actual sale of the bonds, we're going to do after the project has been bid out, and I know the exact dollar amount, so I can scale it down then if need be. But you're going to authorize up to a dollar amount. When I sell the bonds, I only need a majority of the county board to confirm the sale of those bonds. So the big vote is in December. The actual bond sale will probably be later in 2025. So similarly, when we get to 2027, we'll follow that same pattern. I'll probably have a bond authorization in December of 2026 with the sale of the bonds, depending on where the market's looking at. Right now, rates are going down. Or will be going down. So I want to wait on the bond sales as long as possible. Whereas when we did the government, I wanted to rush them because rates were going up. So in 2027, depending on the direction of those, I'll either rush it in 27 or I'll stretch it into 27 for the actual sale. But I'll ask for the authorization probably the month after you've approved the project in the budget.
I'm sorry, Supervisor Remmer, I thought you were pointing.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, like you always do, you bring to the board a nice presentation as to here's our bond rating, here's our situation, and you have a measure of our situation. We've always had a good situation with, we have this much room to bond. Those figures, I can't remember the terms, but that I think is where I was getting a feel, do we have the room in, as far as our standings to after the 10 for something?
Yeah, so municipalities are authorized to borrow up to 5% of their equalized value, which puts us at, hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a stupid amount. We would never get that high. So, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of capacity for the county. There's more capacity than there's practical application.
Well, and we're retiring some of the other debt at the same time, so we're always sort of fluctuating capacity.
Correct.
Any other questions? Hearing none, well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation in every way. Gives us a lot of food for thought, and I guess the next item on the agenda would be the sheriff. And I was just going to ask, as we get into that, Sheriff, we're coming up on our annual jail inspection. Do you have some thoughts on when that should be or could be? And we could talk about that as part of your presentation.
Yeah, didn't we push that back last year to August?
I think we did.
I think it was August. We can plan for that August again, if we want to look at that timetable. I'm not sure what date that falls on, but we can surely
Right. Well,
prepare for that.
we could work around whatever availability is, because I think at one point we were hoping to get down to, we didn't talk about it specifically this year with our new board, but we were hoping to maybe get down to 10 meetings a year, as we've done in the last couple of years. So it might be, August might be a good time. If you could, well, we can throw out some dates and get feedback from the committee as to what works for you, and make sure that the date we've got scheduled can work for you.
August 1st is the meeting date.
Okay, we'll tentatively plan for, or prepare for, August 1st of the jail inspection by statute to meet that requirement.
Okay, great. And if there's any conflict that comes up, we can try to work around it. Thanks, Sheriff.
So we looked at some of the monthly statistics. Before I get into that, my thanks to Brent Standard for all the work he's done on that last presentation. This has been a process and a project now that's taken a lot of digging into. Captain Anderson assisted as well on getting a lot of the statistics, and it's a pretty telling direction of where we're going. As we continue to talk about how fast the county is growing as well, and just trying to anticipate as best we can. Now we look at some more historical stuff, and here was just a kind of a snapshot of some of the things over the last, the month of April, as far as, crashes, calls for service. I believe I checked today, we are at 3 fatalities on the year. There was one not too long ago on the freeway that was handled by State Patrol. We've had 2 out into the county that we've handled. But we look at crashes, again, and we've all seen the amount of detours, road closures. The interstate is pushing more traffic into the county, only to run into more road construction within the county, the township roads. So I anticipate this year and next summer to be increasing with crashes, increasing with injury crashes, just because of some of the detours that are forcing. I know there's another large project, County Road A, in August, will be shut down by the town hall to put in a roundabout. That's going to push into a lot of the other township roads. So I anticipate, again, these numbers to change, where a comparison to last year and the year before isn't going to be a fair comparison because of all the reroutes that we're doing here. So, you know, even on page 3, we look at the daily workload. It's broken down into comparison of months. But again, you know, we're trying to do as best we can. The field services general response, I thought this was an interesting thing to share, and it's the heat map. Now with our body cams, the heat maps pick up, and we also utilize and do some reports to certain contracted areas. You know, they give us, you know, we have several contracts now with Troy Township, Star Prairie Township, Village of Star Prairie, and there's certain things that they want done, certain areas that they want attention to, and we utilize some of these heat maps for that, to show them that that's where the roads we're hitting. You know, this is where we've directed the enforcement of where they want that to be done. So you see we kind of touch a large number of roads. This was just for the first quarter of 2024. And really it's those main traveled, and you know, this isn't just general patrol. As you look at those main thoroughfares, a lot of those are tracking our responses to other calls. You know, those are the quickest routes when we are heading to the east end or heading to the north. It's those main, so it's not just, well, they're only patrolling on the big roads. No, that's our quickest routes when we're responding. So taking that into consideration as well. You know, looking at problematic areas, general response times, but traffic complaints, kind of the heat map sections of that. Crashes again, I like to share this one as well, just, you know, there's car deer crashes, but a lot of injury crashes. Peg marks on the freeway. Again, we have 10 fatalities last year, 11 fatalities last year, I believe. So we're praying we stay at 3 this year. Sadly, at 3. Injury-related crashes. Again, we go to the mandated services as we roll down right there, and that kind of feeds back into transports and how much, as you see there, January with 5 transports at 16,000. We had, because we had extraditions from out of state. We had one inmate that was brought in from Oregon, and I think that was $9,000 to get him back. There was an Oklahoma one that was $3,000, and then there was another one, I can't remember where, for $2,000. That was all in that month. So you're looking at $12,000 to $13,000 on 3 transports. Those eat up a lot. But the reason we're not using our staff is we don't have the staff to go for multiple days, whether it's driving, whether it's flying. Those are taxing. So things to think about, how much we're spending on contracted services to transport now, and what position that would put us in if we're shipping inmates out. Because it's one thing to transport to, for instance, Pierce County, but they have to come back up for court. They have to, you know, then that puts a strain on public defenders meeting with them. There's still technology, and there's still, but there's also some requirements that they are before the judge. So there are some appearances that we do still have to attend to. In the 3 surrounding counties, I believe Pierce is probably 10 years old. Dunn and Polk, I think, are coming up on 20 years old. You know, and we're at 32 or 33. So when we talk about, do others, well, I'm not sure if they're at capacity yet, but their jails aren't as old either. And, you know, they're getting there. I know Pierce County just, they're adding on to their judicial center as well. We're building a new one, I should say, where the jail's at. So whether that changes things. So people are changing around us, but I know we are still strapped for certain areas just because of our population as well. So we look at those contract logs, and again, I just wanted to point out, because that 16,000 kind of snapped me as well as I looked at that, and I had to dig into that a little bit more on what those costs were. Paper services, we thought we'd share that with you, kind of the influx that ebbs and flows as well. Again, the economy is going to change that paper service. Markets, housing markets, foreclosures. And then we wanted to also, the very last one was behavioral health, and how often we're using the BH units. I call them BH units for short. We kind of worked with SHAR and got some numbers. You can see the SCSO is the lighter blue. Other agency use of them is larger. So you see April, 20 other PDs used, and we had 10 or 11. There's 31 in April that, and I've heard these guys out even the last couple days, as soon as they check on, last night was head to River Falls. That was a well-needed pass for those positions for that referendum. So we just thought we wanted to share that with you as well. So I'm not sure if that's kind of the snapshot you guys want, if there's something else that we can glean from some of our records management system. One thing because what I printed, and then we look at dispatch calls for service, that was on a different, and you can see the amount of calls for April, 8,500. And field services for April, that's for the sheriff's office. So, and that's a whole host of different calls, and jail bookings. Kind of feeds into, again, Brent's and Chris Anderson's, kind of their statistics and what we look at and try to track. We look at jail bookings. That's another big one, that per day jail bookings. You see 14, 11 a day, down to 4 and 2, but geez, for intake court Monday in custody and out of custodies, what was that number, Brent? 27, where we were pulling investigators to assist with moving courts, getting people to and from. And if an inmate, yesterday we had one that was kind of hinky, so some investigators were out doing evidence where they do evidence. We had to pull them in to stand by in the courtroom because upstairs is very active. So we look at those jail bookings, but that's the jail. There's also courts, and it all just kind of breathes together. And when they're busy downstairs, they get busy upstairs. So that was a lot. You guys have gotten a lot of statistics and numbers today.
We appreciate it, Sheriff. Questions from the committee? Observations?
No, I think this was a great report. I think, generally, do you see in the summer more jail bookings?
Yes. It just, there's so much going on within the county. More people, more traffic, more easy, nice evenings sitting out having beverages, and we end up having more crashes. More domestics when they get home. We've seen a number of domestics. That's a number we may dig into as well. I mean, it just summer months, and it brings out a lot of activity. The river, I anticipate, will be extremely busy again this summer. During the statistic that always hits me in the head was during COVID, when, of course, doing things outdoors in 2020, but the state park had 1 million visitors. It's 1 million people traveling on County Road A to that destination. That's just that area. That's a lot of people in this county. So summer does bring out an increase.
Sheriff, again, we really appreciate all the work that went into your presentation and Brent's presentation. I just had one question. Do you have a sense for the safety, particularly of your I don't want to exclude the jail personnel, but particularly of your patrol personnel, have we seen an increase in incidents involving them and their safety, or has that been fairly level?
We've seen a little uptick in use of force. We've seen a pretty good uptick in vehicle pursuits, some short, some long, some discontinued, some apprehensions. Extra staff out there helps. Technology has, picked up more stolen vehicles as we have cameras that now indicate to us, so that, technology also brings that in, but we are having a few more uses of force, in the jail. Even last week, someone got a nice cup of urine thrown in their face. So there's just more things going on when we talk about violent crimes. There's more of that. There may be drops in other certain categories, but I think DA Anderson and Judge Needham, I don't want to speak for them, but I have seen violent crimes pick up. And we've seen that in the region. Again, the added people helps. But it is, we're watching that.
Well, we appreciate those comments and everything your staff does every day. Very quickly, request for future agenda items. Hearing none, I know we have some big announcements, so I'll turn back to the sheriff.
Just the announcements. We were out in Washington, D.C. For Police Week. We went out, a number of us, thank goodness for the fundraising efforts by the crew from Take Action on Arcady that got us, many of us out there. There was a very large contingent, family and staff that were able to honor that week, so that was very good. It helped in certain areas for some, and the family was very appreciative of all the efforts of what's taken place here. On to my next, August 14th is our Shop with the Cop. Coming up, that'll be in Richmond. That's our 7th annual. One of our large donors, Norflex, a gentleman by the name of Arnie Anderson, that was one of his passions, and he has given a large amount of money each. He passed away in 2022, and that was one of his, this is used for the kids. So 7th annual this year, we're working on that. We'll be preparing for that. I think last year there was over 60 kids that in Richmond that attended that and benefited from that, so that was good. And then Saturday, we will be doing a dedication of the roadway on Highway 128, Katie Lysing Memorial Highway. So we'll be doing that this weekend at 2 o'clock at the fairgrounds.
What was the specific location?
At the north end of the fairgrounds.
North end of the fairgrounds, right.
Yes.
So that's tomorrow Saturday at 2 o'clock.
Correct.
Any other announcements from anybody? Seeing none, Janet already mentioned our next meeting. Well, no, our July meeting is scheduled for. July 4th would be our normal. Okay.
Fireworks.
Okay, so obviously we're not going to do it on July 4th. I know we run into potential scheduling problems, but we also alluded to the fact earlier in our discussion that we had talked before that we might just try to get in 10 meetings a year. I wonder what the feeling would be of the group, since we had a very long meeting today, covered a lot of ground with just about not everybody, but we'll get you in August. If we maybe want to think at least tentatively in terms of not having a July meeting, and then our next meeting would be August 1st, and we can.
If we needed anything, we could do a special one.
Exactly. If we need, Supervisor Leaf was just saying, if we need something, we can have a special meeting. But other than that, I think I see a consensus that we probably will not schedule a July meeting, but then our next meeting would be August 1st. Is that
with the jail inspection?
With the jail inspection and anything else we might need to do. But we've had a good meeting today. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.